There was a time when traveling by train was the number one choice for Americans, but I wasn't alive to see that. And as much as I wish I could have at least seen a little bit of the golden age of train travel, at the same time, it's not like I can just go back to the 20th century. This may be a harsh truth, but whether we like it or not, there are some things in life that we just can't change, and the time period that we live in is one of those. However, despite that, I still believe that, even in today's day and age, train travel still has at least some of that spark of adventure and excitement and grandeur that it had from all those years ago. And so for a long time, I wanted to travel on a train to experience that for myself. Of course, I've been on zoo trains and amusement park trains, and even trains in places like the Royal Gorge route in Colorado, and most recently, the North Carolina Transportation Museum. But I wanted to travel on a honest-to-goodness, long-distance, mainline, cross-country passenger train, which in my case is Amtrak. And finally, after a lot of waiting and asking and wishing, in the summer of 2018, I got my chance to travel for the first time on Amtrak's famous California Zephyr from Lincoln to Chicago. So, as some of you might know, if you've seen my videos, I'm from Nebraska, and here in Nebraska, we don't really get Amtrak all that much, compared to most other places anyway. Usually, when we do get Amtrak, it's in the dead of night, if the trains are on time anyway. And the only two trains that we get in here are the eastbound and westbound California Zephyrs. So where I'm getting at with this is prior to traveling, on Amtrak, I hadn't really seen much of Amtrak trains. So this was going to be very exciting for me, not just because I'm traveling by train, but I'll be able to see Amtrak up close and personal, which I hadn't really seen before. So it was after 3 a.m. when our eastbound train, number 6, pulled into Lincoln, and I remember seeing the headlight of the lead P42 rounding the bend and pulling into the station. And our leaders were just two average Phase 5 Genesis engines. Might be your average engines, but I mean, for me, of course, it was a big deal. And I don't remember the numbers, but I think the second one was at 60-something. But, yeah, so that was our train, and it was my mom and I. So we were traveling on the Roomette sleeper, which isn't too big. It's it's basically what it sounds, a roomette. It's basically just a bunk bed, which can be folded down into 2 seats and a fold-out table. And that's about it. So it isn't very much, but I mean, there's a decent amount of space in there. The seats were nice. You get more legroom than you do on an airplane. No offense to the airlines out there, but I mean, at least I get legroom. So we were going in a roomette for our train trip to Chicago, and we boarded the train, and we were off to the Zephyr's next stop of Omaha. And I remember seeing the train starting and just thinking, here we go. This is where it all begins. And pretty soon we were whizzing through the Nebraska countryside with the red glow of railroad crossings flying by at 80 miles an hour and the horn of our leading Genesis knowing basically for when a crossing is coming. And it was definitely an experience that I had never felt before. It's distinct to even something that you would see in a car ride. It's distinct to even driving on the interstate. It's different from something like that. But pretty soon we arrived in Omaha, and we were on the left side of the train. So I was facing the Durham Museum, which was on the other side. I'm trying to paint a picture here. So the direction that our train was facing, I could see the Durham Museum as our train was stopped at the station in Omaha. So I could see the Durham Museum from where we were at, which if you don't know, the Durham Museum is like a railroad museum in Omaha. But I could see the Durham Museum, and I remember seeing like some Union Pacific Jeeps switching out a local right next to us. So that was pretty cool, and that's going to be a recurring theme with these passenger train trips. And before long after that, we departed Omaha, continued creeping our way through the city with the street lights of the dead of night. And I don't know if I got any sleep on the train that night just because I was so excited to be like actually traveling on a train. Like, this is it. I'm riding on a train on the main line. This is amazing. So, of course, that was a very fascinating experience for the first time. But anyway, we continued going through, we passed into Iowa, and we kept going through Iowa, and before long, the sun rose, and it became morning. And I don't remember much else until we get to, like, Illinois. I remember crossing over the Mississippi River into Illinois, and this was also my first time ever being in Illinois. I had never been to Chicago or just the state of Illinois before this. So that was also exciting. And I remember we made a few more stops in Iowa and in Illinois before we reached Chicago. But I remember passing by freight trains, and I had never been so close to a freight train before. It was like, if you've ever been on Amtrak or just a train in general, you know that it's like the freight trains are literally right next to you. You can almost reach out and touch them. So it's amazing to just be like so close to a freight train without breaking any trespassing law whatsoever. That's, again, a very interesting feeling, which I had never really experienced before that. So there was that. And again, going back to the flying through the country at 80 miles an hour, we were passing through small town Illinois at this time. And I remember just seeing like the crossings going by and the little buildings and the playgrounds and the small roads through the towns and just all of it flashing by at 80 miles an hour. It's just a perspective that's even different from being on the highway. It's like its own distinct thing. And not long after, we started getting into more urban areas. We made a stop in Naperville. And around this time was the first time that I ever saw a Metro train, because I soon started seeing the Metro trains flashing by. And they were gone just as fast as they came, obviously. But that was cool to see Metra for the first time. And I think it was also my first time just seeing a commuter train in general. So Metra is my first commuter railroad that I spotted. But we were getting into Chicago before we finally arrived in Chicago Union Station. And our train was actually on time. From what I remember, we made pretty good time going into Chicago Union Station. It was afternoon by that point, but I think we were basically on time getting into Chicago, so that was nice. So there was that. We spent a few nights in Chicago. We actually went to the Museum of Science and Industry, and of course we saw the trains that were there. I got to see the Burlington Zephyr and 999, and of course the Great Train Story. So that was fun. But it doesn't just end there. We took the train to Chicago, and then we took the train back. So it's time for round two. So we then took the westbound California Zephyr, which is train number 5. And I remember that there are actually quite a few people boarding the train. For one thing, Chicago Union Station is like decently busy, from what I can recall. And these trains are far from empty. I mean, there were a decent amount of people boarding with us. So, I mean, there's still a decent amount of demand for passenger trains even now, which I guess is pretty good. That's nice to see. So we were boarding. We were taking coach this time. We weren't taking roomette. We were going by coach this time, which is just your average seating, your average aisle seating, which still, I mean, is a bit more space than an airline. No offense to the airlines, but I mean, it's kind of true. But anyway, so we were sitting in the coach and our train departed, and we could see the passenger train to the left of us. There was an Amtrak train to the left of us as we were pulling out of Chicago, and that train to the left of us was stopped. So as we were pulling out, we're passing by this train, and one of the lead engines on this train, it's the Phase 3 Heritage Unit. That's right, I saw an Amtrak Heritage Unit. I don't remember if it was 145 or 822, but it was one of them, and I was very happy about that, as you can imagine. And then, so we saw the Heritage Unit, and then we started passing by more passenger trains, which were also stopped. And then I saw some private cars. There were like 2 private cars on another train. And we continued out of like the little shed that the trains go to in Chicago Union Station. We started getting like out into the sunlight. And I remember seeing like the passenger cars and at least 1 or 2 Dash 8s just running around the yard. And I remember seeing the Amtrak locomotive facility with all the engines lined up. And one of the engines in that line, it's the Phase 2 Heritage Unit, which would have been 130 at this time. So just in that little bit of time, I saw 2 Heritage Units, private cars, and Dash 8s. Now, as you can probably put together by now, I don't have pictures of these, which I am very unhappy about. If I were to do this all over again, you bet I am bringing a camera, because I don't know what I was thinking, but I did not bring my camera, and as you can imagine, I wish I did. But anyway, that's whatever. But so we saw all that, and I don't remember much else. It's basically what I already recounted, just going through rural Illinois, back west, crossing the Mississippi River. We passed a few freight trains, which was nice. Our train was delayed by a little bit. I don't know how much. It wasn't like multiple hours late, but I think it was delayed by a little bit. But there was that. And I think I fell asleep for a little bit, but I was awake by the time that we made it back to Lincoln. And apparently our train was a little bit late, but I don't know by how much. It was still the dead of night, so I wouldn't imagine it was by too much. And I don't know what the lead engines are for our train, what the lead engines were for our train at this point. I didn't really see that, but that happened. So that marks the end of what was my first experience with an Amtrak train. Overall, very positive. I quite liked it. And of course, as I learned from this, bring a camera. Bring a camera. Bring a camera. Don't you ever forget a camera again. And thankfully, I learned that lesson, and I took it to heart, because I got a second chance. In the following summer, in 2019, I got to go on the California Zephyr again, this time westbound to Denver, Colorado. And this time I actually remembered my camera, and that was an outstanding move on my part. So I'm very glad I remember that. So what happened that time was, it was a pretty similar case where it started off. We got to Lincoln Station a little before midnight, waiting for number 5, which is the westbound Zephyr, as I think I already mentioned. So we were just waiting for number 5. We were going by coach this time, not the roomette. And we were waiting for the Zephyr. We actually got to see a few BNSF freight trains while we were waiting. I was surprised at how busy the Creston subdivision is after midnight. But we're waiting for the Zephyr. It's after midnight, but then we find out the Zephyr's delayed. I think we found this out from the Amtrak app, because, like most travel companies have an app. Amtrak does too, and I don't know if we learned it from like the app or somewhere, but Apparently, something about number 5 being delayed in Omaha. I'm not sure. It might have had something to do with another train or not, but I'm not exactly sure. But whatever went down, point is, our train was being delayed by at least an hour, so we would have to wait. And fortunately, we saw a few more BNSF freight trains while we were waiting, so that proved to be the entertainment for the night. So about an hour passed, and then we get another notification saying the Zephyr is delayed again. So this process of hearing it's delayed, waiting a little while, and then hearing it's delayed again, that process continued for the next several hours before our train finally pulled in just before 3 a.m. And the lead engines, which I actually got on camera this time, were 155, a P42, and to my delight, 824, which is a more uncommon P40. And these would be our 2 engines to Denver. That would be our power. So, we walked all the way back to the last coach, which was going to be our seating. We departed Lincoln just after 3 a.m. Our train was just under 3 hours late at that point, but more about that later. I did manage to get a little bit of sleep at this time, just because, it had been a long night. We were pretty tired from waiting. So, yeah, that happened. I didn't see when we stopped in some of the later towns, because, of course, I was asleep. So after Lincoln, the California Zephyr then stops in Hastings, and after that it stops in Holdridge. I was awake for the stop in Holdridge, and I got a picture of a passenger car, which is on display at the depot there. That's actually a former Gulf Mobile in Northern, I believe, which became Gulf Mobile in Ohio. So I don't know how that passenger car got there, but, it was a pretty interesting sight. And, yeah, that was nice. And then after Holdridge, the next stop is McCook, which is the last stop in Nebraska until we get to Colorado. And I got some pictures of the BNSF yard in McCook. And after this, we crossed into Colorado. Our train, unfortunately, continued being delayed. But the view was nice, at least. So there was that. But the conductors kept going on the little intercom, because Amtrak trains have like an intercom or something on them, kind of like on a plane where it's like the flight attendants and the captain. It's like that. So basically Amtrak trains have an intercom, and the conductors just kept saying, "This train is delayed. We're sorry for the inconvenience." So, they apologized. So at least they're self-aware. They know about being late. But, anyway, our train kept being delayed. We eventually made it to Fort Morgan, which is the first stop in Colorado and the last stop until Denver. So we made a quick stop in Fort Morgan. We continued through rural Colorado, and then we started creeping into big city Denver. And at this point, our train was over 5 hours late. It was the afternoon when we should have been in Denver by the morning. But, hey, I saw a lot of BNSF trains. I got some pictures of BNSF's, I believe it's the 31st Street yard. It's basically I got some pictures of their locomotive facility that they have in the Denver yard just outside of Denver Union Station. So I got some pictures of that. Our train took like this little Y so that it could back into the station. It could like reverse into Denver Union Station. So I got some pictures of the locomotive facility, including my first ever catch of a Ferromex unit on camera, which was pretty nice. But we backed into Denver Union Station, which is actually quite a nice station, by the way. We pulled to a stop, and that marked the end. Unfortunately, we did not go on Amtrak when we headed back to Lincoln, and I have not been on Amtrak since. So that's basically where that ended. So basically, when I took the train to Denver and my experience with the Royal Gorge route are basically some of my closest experiences that I have with the Denver and Rio Grande. But hey, that's better than nothing. So that basically brings us to the present. I haven't been on Amtrak since, but I would absolutely love to go back sometime. And you bet I am not forgetting my camera. I am going to be documenting that in full. So, yeah, no worries there. Learned my lesson. But basically, to bring this back home, I know that unfortunately Amtrak is kind of notorious for being late, and that's been blamed on the freight rail companies just being big bad bullies to Amtrak, and most recently PSR, Precision Scheduled Railroading, has been considered a cause with its long trains. And I mean, PSR I could kind of see. Of course, I think that the priority issue, the issue of where freight trains are given priority over Amtrak, which leads to the Amtrak trains being delayed, I would say that was probably part of the cause in this case, especially on my trip to Denver in 2019, because the BNSF line from Lincoln to Denver is mostly single-tracked, and there's a decent amount of traffic on that line. I mean, there's grain, there's manifest, and there's intermodals that go to and from Denver. So it's a decently traveled line. It's single-tracked, so in a case like that, I can see how our train was over 5 hours late. Now, in terms of PSR and how that keys into this, I mean, I could see how it would be a cause, especially in if this were a bigger city or a more heavily traveled rail corridor, then yeah, that would probably be more obvious. But I mean, I could see how PSR would be caused in this case, because maybe it's BNSF ran a massive train through Denver or through Lincoln, and the Zephyr would have had to wait for that. Or if Union Pacific ran a massive train through Omaha, and the Zephyr would have had to wait for it then. If it's something like that, I could see. And in 2019, I mean, PSR wasn't exactly in full swing yet. I don't know if they were doing it on every single train on a daily basis, but I mean, the idea of longer trains very much existed by that time. Several railroads had already implemented PSR, including Union Pacific, and BNSF was starting to run some big coal trains at that time, including through Colorado, so that might explain a little bit. So whether it was because of massive freight trains or not, I don't know if we'll know for sure, but hey, I mean, I guess it's just, that's just a theory. So that hopefully explains a little bit in regards to our timeliness of our train. But getting back to the main point of this, my experience with Amtrak, I mean, sure, Amtrak is far from perfect. Yes, they have their flaws. Yes, they may be notoriously late, but I do still think that was an awesome experience, and I loved every minute of it. It was, well, okay, maybe not every minute, but at least most of the minutes. It was really enjoyable. Point is, I liked it a lot. Of course, I'm biased because, I'm a rail fan, but I mean, if you're not in a rush when traveling, and if you want to see the country in a way that you might not have seen it before, then, I mean, I definitely learned a lot from traveling on Amtrak. It was really unique. I'd call it a unique experience. Something different from what I'm used to, because I've been on a lot of road trips. I've flown on a lot of flights, but Amtrak is still different from that, in my opinion. So, yeah, very unique experience, very different way of seeing the country. And not just seeing the country, but also just seeing the railroad industry. Because, I mean, like I said, I had never been so close to freight trains in all my life, and I had never been so much in the thick of freight rail operations. I saw so many things on Amtrak that I have not seen much of, if any of, since then. A lot of unique things that I've caught on Amtrak. For one example, I think it was somewhere in Iowa. I'm pretty sure it was in Iowa somewhere. On my 2018 trip, we were passing by this small BNSF yard, and I saw 2 red F units, which I'm pretty sure were used for snow removal at one point. I know that Burlington Northern had F units that they used to clear snow, and I'm pretty sure that's what they were for, because they were painted in the red color that I've seen pictures of online for snow removal. But that was the only time that I've ever seen F units somewhere other than a museum. And that's just one example of I've seen so many things traveling on the train that I wouldn't have even known existed from just rail fanning. So it's definitely, in more ways than one, Amtrak has been a very interesting perspective on both the railroad industry and just traveling the country in general. So would I recommend it? I'd say yes. If you have the means, if you're not in a rush, if you want to learn more and see more about this country, and if you're a rail fan and you want to see more trains, because there are going to be plenty of trains, I'll tell you that. But if you want to travel by train, if you want to see the country in a different way, if you want to experience more of the American railroad industry, and most of all, if you're not in a rush traveling, then I would give Amtrak my highest recommendation. It is a really cool experience, and as I mentioned, there's still a decent amount of people who travel Amtrak. I mean, even at 3 a.m. in downtown Lincoln, Nebraska, there was still a decent amount of people boarding. At least that was the case when we boarded on the 2019 trip in Denver. There were a decent amount of other people boarding with us that night, even though the train was hours late. So at the very least, there is still demand. And while it may not be the same as it used to be, while it may have its many flaws, and while it may not be nearly as romanticized or popularized or just loved as it once was, I do still think that train travel, even in the modern day, is still a very unforgettable experience that still has at least some of that sense of adventure and wonder and fascination that it did from all those years ago. So to end off this episode, I'll ask you guys, what's your experience traveling on Amtrak? Or if there is an Amtrak where you live, what's your experience just traveling on a passenger train in general? Did you like it? How was it? So you can just answer that in the comments. Let me know. Thank you for listening, and thank you everyone who has supported this podcast so far. I was kind of worried where this was going to go, how well of an idea this was going to be. So thank you everyone who has supported this, and I'll see you next time in the Iron Horse Stables.